Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Swan's War by Michael Oren, narrated by Nicol Zanzarella. Prologue. May 1944. Just after sunrise, in a Mercury coupe, painted black and white to look like one of the squad cars from the coast, Captain Swann patrolled. The route began in town, still locked up at this hour, the storefronts dark, and continued along the docks, rising slightly with the tide. A few begrudging street lamps, a moss-mottled stone for the fisherman lost at sea. From there, the vehicle crawled up a bluff to an intersection lorded over by the First Congregational Church, and then turned north, past the general store and Old Man Gainer's shipyard, and finally the Flotsam Bar. Beyond lay only landscape, crusty and gnarled. 20 miles off the shores of Massachusetts, this was the island its original inhabitants called Hockomock, the Devil's Place, but whose Puritan settlers renamed Fort Wheelock, and later, less belligerently, Fourth Cliff. Picking up speed, the coupe passed by a few faux rustic summer houses, most of them boarded up for the duration, and the skeletons of skiffs washed up by storms, the cranberry bogs and the prison camp with its Quonset huts and wire, and then, as incongruous as a cinder block plopped on a holiday table, the emplacement. 3 rectangular bunkers, the biggest one in the middle and sprouting a long, black barrel pointing eastward. That, and the flagpole set in a ring of symmetrical stones, was the only evidence that this was a military site. A lone cannon guarding an entire nation from enemy ships that had all but disappeared. The road turned from pavement to sand. The end came abruptly after some scraggly dunes on a scarp overlooking a beach. Little more than a shingle, really, it proffered neither sand nor shade, only pebbles and sharp-edged shells. The ocean was gray and still too cold for swimming. Its white-capped waves rose and fell uninvitingly. Captain Swann stepped out of the car, hand on holster, and gazed down at the shore. This was where they used to drive on his motorcycle and lay naked on a boho blanket. They made love here that last August night and were still commingled at dawn, entwined between the gull screeches and the salty smell of their bodies, the sizzling of surf between stones. Here they wept, or at least she did, her tears tinged with rage. Atop one of the island's 4 cliffs, whether the second or third was widely debated, the police captain lingered. Not for much longer, though. Soon the boats would be setting out to sea, only to return at twilight, brimming with cod, bluefish, herring, and scup. The weighing and filleting would then begin, and the bargaining with the buyers who arrived on the last of the 3 daily ferries from Falmouth. Another day in a world utterly cut off from the real one, boring, unchanging, and seemingly at peace. With a tip of a hat brim, the captain returned to the patrol car and steered it back toward town. The main task now was to figure out how to pass the next 8 hours. Filling out forms for requisitions not needed, reports for a stolen bicycle or an unpaid bar tab, never anything graver. Hogan, the well-meaning but half-witted patrolman, screwing up in yet another exasperating way. But other than that, nothing. Just thinking, remembering, and wrestling with loss. The Mercury arrived back in town with the sun lodged firmly in the sky. The stores, many of them selling tackle, were open, and boats were nestling the dock. But something was different. The way the fishermen gathered, not gabbing or bragging or smoking their 10th old gold of the morning, but murmuring anxiously to one another. They scarcely looked up as the captain parked and exited the coupe. Their eyes were fixed on a net hauled up and tangled around a bycatch too large to be a fish, even a shark. "'Bout time," the captain heard one of the trawlers hiss. They were an elderly bunch, some visibly sick, others not by trade fishermen at all. The real ones, the healthy ones, were off fighting the war in Europe and the Pacific, or stationed stateside far from Forthcliffe. The captain edged closer to the net and heard another of the old trawlermen spit, "Black Bass." A vicious nickname. But this was no moment for argument, only for concentration, assessing the evidence. Inside the net was a man in a khaki uniform, a shoulder patch visible through the mesh. "All right, who knows who this is?" Swann asked, and then, after a pause, "was." But the fisherman only gawped. Most had never addressed the captain before, at least not officially, and were clearly unimpressed by the rank. Nothing seemed to command their respect, neither the black leather jacket or the 8-point cap, not the duty belt with its handcuffs and colt. There was little time to worry about it, though, with a foreigner dead and dripping on a Forthcliffe dock. "I do," one of them finally volunteered, by far the youngest, the Devereaux boy, working until his number came up. "I do," he repeated to the captain, Mary Beth Swann. "Ma'am." Part 1. 1. Francesco Albertini. That was the name she wrote in her onionskin notepad, and the cause of death? Drowning. Identification was simple. The crews of the trawlers he often worked on knew him, as did the dockhands and merchants. They remembered a rangy, snaggle-toothed man in his 20s, but still acne-scarred, a sadness stamped in his expression. Yet he stopped to help old ladies carry groceries and had a buoyant buongiorno for everyone. If all that didn't suffice, there was his shoulder patch testifying to his status as one of the 90 or so Italian prisoners of war interned on Forthcliffe Island. Captured in America's battles overseas, first in North Africa and then in Sicily, and now Italy itself, the POWs were shipped stateside and kept separate from their German allies, who were considered more belligerent. Rather than being penned up all day behind barbed wire, the Italians were left mostly on their own and allowed, encouraged, to go out and work. For the short-handed fishermen, shopkeepers, and farmers who hired them for minimal wages, the Italians were a lifeline. But nobody threw one to Francesco. Most of the Italians were farm or city boys who could easily hurt themselves fly fishing. Mary Beth could almost picture him tripping over some hawser and tumbling off the pier. No one would have heard his cries, not over the chugging of engines. The accident was regrettable, certainly, but hardly suspicious. The body was cut loose and laid out on the dock. Mary Beth forced herself to kneel next to it, trying not to look at the face, the tongue bulging purple, the eyes already plucked out by crabs. She could not show any squeamishness, not with half the town looking on. Resisting the urge to play with her wedding band, an old nervous habit, she plumbed the pockets for effects. There weren't many, only small change, a St. Christopher's medal, and a wilted photograph. Stuffing these into her jacket, she asked one of the tackle store owners to go and fetch Doc Cunningham. From another, with a pickup truck, she requested that the body be brought back to the camp for burial. Then, pushing the cap up her forehead, wiping her hands on her pants, she rose and returned to the coupe. Driving to the station, her queasiness thickened. It wasn't just the memory of the dead man's face, puffy and pale, and the smell, but a nagging sense that she'd missed something. It gnawed at her while she completed the report at her desk. It haunted her at noontime, killing her appetite. She stared through the filmy glass on the door, reminded again that the name Captain Swann, stenciled there, referred to somebody else. Her eyes fell to the photograph drying on her desk blotter. It showed a much older woman, black-clad and plump, and two little girls in braids. The three of them seemed to stare back at the police captain as if in judgment. What was there to write, really? That a young farm boy, suddenly shipped out to war and imprisoned in some faraway land, died not in his own bed surrounded by family, but in a frigid ocean alone? And even if she filed a report, who would read it? She had no superior officer that she knew of. No one back on the coast who cared a feather what went on and didn't on humdrum Fourth Cliff, especially not in wartime. The only power on the island was Old Man Gaynor, the owner of the shipyard and Fourth Cliff's de facto mayor. He oversaw the upkeep of the docks and roads and the pay of anyone who needed to be paid, police included. Yet his true authority was a mystery to Mary Beth, who could count on one hand the time she'd seen him, much less spoken to him. Absent some dire emergency, the old man kept to himself. He'd read her report, possibly, but doubtfully do anything about it. Mary Beth scribbled it out anyway, afraid she misspelled Albertini. Signing the form, she sighed and tried not to look again at the photograph. A car crunched on the Coquina Drive outside. Straightening behind her desk, Mary Beth nodded as Dr. Horace Cunningham gimped in. "You might have been hasty," he wheezed. He sat, or rather crumbled, into a chair opposite her and lit up a Chesterfield. Years of smoking had stained not only his fingers but his teeth. His skin was sallow, and his blonde hair thinning and limp. The cuffs of his tailored shirt had frayed. "Hasty? How?" Cunningham puffed. "I took the liberty of examining the body. And, before burial, I asked that it be brought to my office." His office was in reality a 2-room apartment over the Fourth Cliff's only diner, not exactly the Ritz. That was where this Dartmouth-trained practitioner, a Back Bay grandee, languished after an incident some years ago with a disgruntled patient in Newport. Luckily for him, the islanders needed his services, the occasional stitch or baby delivery. Otherwise, they ignored him. Mary Beth, too, sensing in Cunningham something alien, even to an outlander like herself, preferred to keep her distance. It took something unusual, a post-mortem on a waterlogged corpse, to engage him. "You examined the prisoner, yes?" Unusually high even in casual talk, Cunningham's voice crescendoed. His eyes, a diluted blue, grew dark. "I'm not blaming you, of course, what with the net and all those clodhoppers watching. But what made you think he drowned?" Silence gripped the station, broken only by the crackle of tobacco. "The tongue," Cunningham said, "stuck out and swollen, and the red marks on the cheeks easily mistaken for pimples. Look a little lower under the collar, and you would have seen the welts." He struggled. The eyes were now midnight, the voice for once deep. "He was strangled." "You mean murdered?" "Unless he garroted himself. Not easy." The doctor exhaled. "Tried it once myself." "And you're positive?" Already she was twisting the ring. "Just to make sure, I took a syringe and drew a sample. While I'm no coroner, I know a dry lung when I see one." This was said with a triumphal puff, followed by the screech of the doctor's chair. "I think, Captain Swann, you have a case on your hands. Your first, correct?" A smile followed, almost lipless and far from sympathetic. "I wonder," he said while leaving, "what would Archie do?" Alone again, Mary Beth looked around the station. There wasn't much to observe. 2 radios, a Philco Cathedral she listened to those nights when nothing happened, which was virtually always, and a 2-way Motorola hooked up to the coupe in case of emergencies, which they never had. An electric fan, not yet necessary in this still cool May, perched on military-style file cabinets that she knew stood mostly empty. 2 blinded windows and walls with the island's usual bric-a-brac, a spindled ship wheel, an unnamed whaler's portrait, a mounted 3-foot cusk, along with a map of Fourth Cliff. The locals likened it to a fishhook, but to Mary Beth it was saxophone-shaped. Thick and curved at the point of the town, wide at one end and tapered at the other. Printed some years before, the map was missing both the emplacement and the prisoner of war camp, though both had been penciled in. The station was a rickety affair, always in danger of blowing away in some gale. If so, the desk alone would remain. Fashioned from sturdy black ash, it sat on lion's paws and housed coffin-like drawers and a blotter of seafoam green. On this, Mary Beth laid her head, chin first, and considered her bleak situation. She tried, sweetly painful though it was, to remember just how it was she got there. How could she have known, that Saturday in the Commons 5 years before, that her entire life was about to change? How could she remotely have anticipated the earthquake about to take place as she sat by the pond and ate her ham and cheese lunch, gulping so as not to be late? Like any rookie, she had to prove herself, but 10 times more so as a woman. This meant chasing after streetwalkers and urchins in a calf-length skirt, an ill-fitting capey, and shoes made for shopkeepers. It meant putting up with pinches and wisecracks, even from other police. "Want to see my billy club?" they'd taunt her, and "Can I cop a feel?" Nothing protected her, not the badge, or her formidable build, or even her father, a third-generation Boyle in uniform. There weren't many women in the BPD back then, and fewer still made it through their initial assignments. She would survive, though. She'd prove her worth to all of them, her father foremost. Someday, she'd even make sergeant. The last thing she anticipated, crumbling her lunch bag, was to hear someone suggest, "You might want to wash that down," and to look up into a blinding penumbra. Mary Beth squinted, she blinked, and only then detected the figure of a young man, not too tall or broad-shouldered, but solid nevertheless, holding out a Coke. A breaker of brown hair and teeth, a whiteness not often seen in her working-class Southie neighborhood. Though pushing 30, his looks remained boyish, his nose pugged and chin cleft. His manner was easy enough for a student's, but the way he carried himself, relaxed yet subtly on guard, and his hard-baked tan told her he, too, was a cop. Still, she was not the type to talk with strangers, especially on duty. But it was hot outside, a piece of crust was stuck in her throat, and there was something in the feminine figure of that bottle, pierced by a single straw, that made her reach out and accept it. That kept her from shifting too far on the bench as the young man sat down and introduced himself. So she learned his name, which, in view of the swans playing the public garden pond, made her laugh, and that he was indeed a policeman, which didn't. He talked about the weekend training with his Marine Reserve unit, the game he took in at Fenway, and the maritime world he policed. Mostly, though, he asked questions. What life was like for her on the force, the challenges she encountered. More shocking than his inquiries were her heartfelt answers. She felt like a little girl in church again, confessing. And she appreciated the way he looked at her, not at her body or even her face, black Irish pale and keenly pretty, but directly into the green of her eyes. Dinner that night was almost assumed, as was Sunday brunch the next morning before he returned to work. 5 years and an eon ago, with so much upheaval in between. Her father's anguish at her Protestant wedding, her relocation to a place which, from his perspective, might have been Timbuktu. And then the islanders who, though accustomed to summer vacationers, could be cold to those wash-ashores who stayed on. Especially the Bostonians, with accents stripped of most R's and squeezed through the nose, who said frap when they meant milkshake and tonic even for a Coke. And to Forthcliff's first-ever policewoman, the locals could be downright hostile. Who did she think she was, they seemed to carp, this city slicker looking down on everyone, a stranger who just happened to marry their captain? For Archie Swann was more than just the law for them. Descended from the earliest settlers, the sea and its supplicants in his blood, he understood the island as few could. Knew all the names of every strand and inlet. The only child of a father who died of polio and a mother of heartbreak shortly thereafter, he was unofficially adopted by all of Forthcliff. The people respected him, and he, in turn, cared for them, guarded them as best he could from the ocean's myriad hazards, and comforted them in their hour of loss. They put up with his crisscrossing the dunes on his beloved Harley, and forgave him for coming home with a Beantown brat. It didn't mean, though, that they had to like her. Mary Beth remembered all this, with her chin still pinioned on the blotter. She recalled the love, the companionship, the sex, and then, of course, the war, which erased all that. And she recalled her anger, but refused to give in to it, not tonight, with a murderer lurking. Instead, she remained at her desk, wishing she had a drink and a cigarette, both of which she'd given up for that straight-laced husband of hers. The distant surf crashed, a foghorn yowled, and her eyes fell once again to the photograph. An old woman in black with two braided girls, Francesco's mother and sister, she supposed. They would eventually learn of his death and ask why there had been no justice. Why had there been no law? She asked herself all the same questions, along with the one raised by Cunningham. She posed it out loud as if someone were beside her in the station, to the whaler's portrait and the mounted fish. What would Archie have done? 2. Motive. That's what Archie or any competent officer would seek first. The reason why one human being would take another's life, in this case with extraordinary violence. The need to avoid being caught for the crime, and to make it seem like an accident. But who in Fourth Cliff would want to kill Francesco? Mary Beth combed her mind. The victim was Italian, a nationality not universally adored in America. Sinatra and DiMaggio notwithstanding, many people, including her own father, considered them either untrustworthy or slavishly loyal, oversexed or effeminate, underworld types or publicity hounds. Incapable of following orders, they nevertheless marched when commanded by the Pope or Il Duce. Wops, greaseballs, dagos, all were flung around interchangeably in her old Irish neighborhood. Italians thought twice before detouring down her street. And what bubbled over in South Boston stewed just below Fourth Cliff's surface. Those affable islanders with their aya and chowda, their rantum scoots and nor'easters, harbored entire armadas of hate. For black people first, then Jews, not that they knew any, followed by faunas from any number of Mediterranean or Eastern European countries, especially Roman Catholics. Papists, the locals called them, like the Italians. For more than 3 years, Italy had been at war with the United States. Francesco was not merely an alien, but an enemy alien, in certain circumstances, justifiably shot on sight. These and other thoughts swarmed through Mary Beth's mind during the rest of the day, and into the night, most of which she spent pacing the station's floor. Dawn broke as she lifted her head from the blotter and saw that it was too late to go home. Instead, she made herself a bitter cup of postum, poured in some armored heifer, canned milk, and a teaspoon of rationed sugar. Mug in hand, she returned to the desk and began rifling its drawers for a pocket mirror, half hoping she wouldn't find one and have to grapple with the knots in her cropped short hair and the circles under her eyes. She had not put on a speck of makeup since high school, not even on her wedding day. The blue of her uniform was more than enough color for one woman, Mary Beth declared. Her search was interrupted by the bring-bring of a bicycle bell. A cringeworthy sound on all other mornings. On this one, it was birdsong. A moment later, Officer Hogan ambled in. A man of maybe 25, with a long, pinched nose, eyes slightly crooked, and teeth so bucked that her father would have said they could eat cob corn through a picket fence. Too dumb for the draft, so people claimed, but not for the Fourth Cliff police. His duties were minimal, cycling about and assisting lost children, retrieving a cat from a tree. Anything more urgent, such as the fisherman who nearly bled out from a wolfish bite, and Hogan could freeze or faint. Though armed with a pistol, Mary Beth doubted he'd ever fired it, or even if the old weapon worked. "Morning, Captain," he chimed, as if oblivious to the state of emergency. "Lemuel." "You should see what the Minerva pulled in." Mary Beth braced herself. "Not another one." "Mackerels, an entire hull of 'em. The look on Shattuck's face, grinning from here to Swampscott." She couldn't decide whether to berate or embrace him. Harmless and loyal, Hogan never questioned the few instructions she gave, or her decision to appoint herself captain. Mary Beth had merely to straighten his high-peaked hat, a leftover from the 1920s, and tighten his shoulder strap and tie so that he at least looked the part. The bicycle would bring, and off he'd go on a beat that nobody knew or even cared about, until reporting for duty again the next morning. Only today was different. "You heard about the prisoner, yes, Lemuel?" Hogan lowered his head. "Francesco." "You knew his name?" Mary Beth was genuinely surprised. Hogan had trouble remembering many things, such as the north from the south side of the island, the Atlantic from the coast. "He was always so friendly, always saluting me and calling me amico or something like that." "Then you know that your amico was killed yesterday. Killed, not drowned, and I have to find out by who." The eyes nodded, the jaw sagged. Hogan nodded as though comprehending. "And you, Lemuel, all I ask is that you stay on the lookout for anything unusual, anything suspicious." "Anything suspicious. Got it, Captain." "And report it immediately to me." "To you. Yes, right away." Hogan turned to exit the station, but halted at the door. "Francesco promised to take me for real spaghetti in the North End after the war," he said, though not necessarily to her. "I guess that's not going to happen." Mary Beth waited for the bicycle crunch to fade before getting up from her desk and retrieving her duty belt, complete with handcuffs and colt. She brushed off the 8-point cap she'd worn since the day she'd thrown out the képi and the calf-length skirt, replacing it with midnight blue pants. She punched into Archie's old black leather jacket, which fit her just fine. Its epaulets sported the H-shaped captain bars that first looked like gateways to freedom, but now seemed to lock her in. Her 5-star badge, once a shield, had come to feel like a target. The coupe followed its usual early morning route, beginning in town and then heading cross-island, past the shipyard and the Flotsam Bar, and through the row of cranberry bogs. Apart from fishing and catering to vacationers, this was Forthcliffe's only industry. With a high water table and unlimited supply of sand, both needed to produce profitable crops, cranberry farming thrived. The only challenge was the paucity of manual laborers, as most of the locals were too proud or too old to stoop to the hard, wet work of harvesting. But that problem was solved abundantly enough and at minimal cost by the Italians. The patrol car swung into their camp, a collection of Quonset huts hastily erected and then sealed off with wire. 4 guard towers, one at each corner, loomed over the prisoners. The wire had rusted and snapped in most places, and the towers were manned solely by gulls. Apart from the Ballard brothers, both veterans of the Great War, who showed up in their doughboy uniforms once daily to deliver food and essentials, nobody supervised the place. Nobody took roll call or kept track of the prisoners' whereabouts. There was no need. In their distinctive khakis, the Italians couldn't just board the ferry from Falmouth, and the coast was too distant to swim. And while one of the fishing boats or some pleasure craft could be shanghaied, that danger was deemed absurd. These were not German POWs, but Italians, peace-loving paisanos most local people believed, who'd been only too happy to surrender, as allergic to war as landlubbers were to seasickness. Mary Beth knew better, though. While many of the inmates were indeed sick of war and wanted only to reunite with their mamas and bambinos and whatever, some still itched for a fight. And though the majority had celebrated Il Duce's demise the previous year, openly toasting his overthrow, Others quietly seethed. Some rejoiced at Mussolini's rescue by Nazi commandos and prayed for his triumphal.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?